The Two Men and a Business Continuity Plan podcast. Navigating success through uncertainty.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 5th episode in our podcast series, aptly named Two Men and a Business Continuity Plan with Charlie and James. For those of you who have been living on the planet Mars and haven't been watching 1 to 4, but tell yourselves off and turn on that subscribe button to it and make sure that you listen to them every month or more frequently if we do them every couple of weeks in future. But let's find out who Charlie and James actually are. Charlie, over to you.
So Charlie McLean Bristol, I'm a business continuity practitioner by trade, been doing this for about 25 years, and I am the founder of Business Continuity Training, along with my brother, and Plan B Consulting, along with my wife.
And I'm James. I've been in resilience a long time, 30 years in a police and environment, 10 years in consultancy. Charlie and I have known each other a really long time. So that's why we're going to cut our teeth over some of the most recent business continuity worthy discussions. And today is a fantastic example because it is very, very current and something that could happen to any company anywhere in the world, large or small. So the topic is, and it could be global, we're going to sort of focus a little bit more on a UK market. The UK is gripped with sleaze allegations at the moment. But what do the consequences of this type of negative attention mean to your business, and how can you and business continuity help protect and recover their reputation and therefore their business? Just so we understand what I'm meaning by sleaze, because it might be a very sort of British word, I mean scandals. So it could be corruption, it could be unethical work practices, or in more recent high-profile cases, it's down to sex scandals. Now, over the last couple of years, I mean, they've gone on forever, but over the last couple of years, there's been some sort of notable companies fall foul of sleaze. Starbucks, L'Oreal, one that's close to my own heart in rugby union, the Welsh Rugby Union, a very famous Confederation of British Industries, the CBI, even charities, Oxfam, Save the Children. And then you've got, more currently, Labour Party in the UK is currently having a torrid time over sleaze. And then there's the most despicable one, really, that's in the headlines at the moment, which is the Harrods scandal and the implications of sexual impropriety of Al Fayed when he owned the company and its ramifications from that moment on. So, Charlie, bit of a big question to start off with. Can organisations actually stop sleaze in the first place?
Well, yes and no. I think companies are always judged by their culture, and they have their culture and the way they do things. Now, hopefully, you work in an organisation that has high moral standards, and so these things don't happen in your organisation. And if there is inappropriate behaviour or inappropriate behaviour to team colleagues, hopefully that will be called out and immediately sort of stop before it even starts. But I do think we do see this, and is it groupthink, where you get this kind of where unacceptable behaviour becomes standard. We looked at the big post office scandal. That's that became standard just to prosecute the postmasters, the postmistresses, almost long after it kind of proved that it wasn't the case. It was the problem with the software, but it was so sort of ingrained in the way they do things. And I think also interesting for business continuity people is, would you call out that behavior? Would you let that organization happen in your organization? Or do you keep your head down and say it's not really my job to call out? We've seen lots of cases with whistleblowers. Whistleblowers have inappropriate behaviour, but who gets sacked? With the whistleblower that gets sacked, it's not the bad person. oh no, the sort of people come around it and say, sack the whistleblower because they're trouble calls them. So, and I think there's moral courage is a great thing in organisations. And I was just couple of days ago. I didn't normally drink at lunchtime. I went out with my boss, and he said, "Oh, have a pint at
Disgraceful
lunchtime." I
behaviour.
normally wouldn't have a.
Disgraceful.
I wouldn't I wouldn't normally have a pint at lunchtime, but he said, "Oh, we're having a pint." So do you go to say, "Oh, moral standards"? I'm not having a pint because it's very naughty to have pints at lunchtime. Or do you say, "Well, it's one pint and it's not every single lunchtime." So where do you draw your moral behaviour? I think the last thing I wanted to say on this thing is moral behaviour changes over the years. So I don't think what Al Fayed did was ever acceptable, but it was more deference, more brushed under carpet, more kind of don't rock the boat, perhaps 20 years ago, where I think some of those behaviours would be much more called out. You hope these days, but you still get these scandals going on these days. So morality, I don't think this is not a moral issue. It's always wrong. But what is acceptable, what people put up with, changes over time. This might some sort of initial thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, I read an article recently from a female who'd recently left the American financial institutions, and she was a stockbroker. And she's recently written a book, and it's not The Wolf of Wall Street, because I really, the Wolf of Wall Street story is fascinating. The behavior that was sort of almost accepted within financial sectors in parts of the world. But she's basically saying in this book, nothing's changed. There's still bad boy behavior. It's still okay to go out and take drugs and use prostitutes and do things like that. And this book's been written in the last sort of 18 months, 2 years. So a question linking into BC is operational resilience has hit the financial sector, as you're well aware, just in case any of the listeners aren't aware. It popped out of the Bank of England Prudential Regulations Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, 2018 as a guidance. 2022 up until, I think it's March next year, they've got time to put their house in order. Now, there's always been discipline, and there's always been banks have got to purvey themselves as what the public would expect them to be as a bank. But do you think you can regulate against misdemeanors, misbehavior, corruption? Or do you think because we're all human beings and because we're all animals and because sex and greed are prime stimulus for human beings, and the fact that every decision we make, according to the academics, is emotionally driven, is there really a chance that we can actually stop sleaze?
No, I don't. I don't think there's. I think we just, as I came back earlier, I think we just have to hope that we work in an organisation with high moral standards. And some people are happy to keep their heads down, and hopefully it doesn't affect me. And they like working there, like the money, or like the bonuses, or location, or whatever. And they will keep their head down and ignore it because it's too much hassle to put your head above the parapet. And if you're going to put your head above the parapet, that usually you get sacked and you get ostracized by your peers. But I think these things sometimes run in organizations, and you get that kind of, we talk in business about organizational culture. And I think, if you work in a particular organization, there are particular cultural aspects, and, they're quite hard to break because they kind of get ingrained. I always remember my army regiment had a really big thing about 20, 25 years ago. There was lots and lots of bullying, and became the sort of entire rank structure was sacked for really kind of nasty bullying, which you wouldn't want to repeat on this nice podcast. And that was the culture from the sort of top to the bottom. And even though people changed, the culture stayed. And one of the things, we went to an operation, and so we were out a lot of time, actually not all together, sitting around in a mess, sort of drinking because there's not an awful lot else to do. It sometimes can happen in army life. And we're off in operations, and a new generation of officers came in and kind of sort of say, we're not going to be bullied. We're a bit older graduates. And it kind of almost broke that culture in our officers' mess of bullying, the old guys bullying the new guys. It was all this is good fun. Oh, it's good fun and hijinks. No, it was bullying, really. And so that was broken just by the characters. But I think those cultural things, we talked about the culture in America you talked about earlier, it's very hard to break. It's very, even society moves on. And what you could say 20 years ago, you'd be probably killed by your own children for saying today. And the chow, it's just banter, you just wouldn't say stuff you did 20 years ago. So you have to move. But that's still unacceptable that a culture does keep going.
Yeah. Do you think, for example, obviously the Harrods scandal that's going on at the moment, Al Fayed had nothing to do with Harrods since 2010. So we're talking sort of 14 years on. How do you feel about companies being held responsible and accountable? Because I was looking up before, barristers saying we're talking tens of millions of pounds in compensation that they are looking to Harrods to pay for misdemeanors that occurred 14 years ago. I mean, I know we're not going to talk legally here, but from a business continuity perspective, that's a big old. Harrods have recovered. Looking at the financial report, they've recovered quite well after the COVID disaster because they weren't particularly good with an online presence, and then they were just recovering, and then this happens. So it's as though they're sort of, what impact is this going to have? Never mind footfall, because there's already a call to boycott Harrods. Then there's the tens of millions of pounds potentially financial compensation. And then later we'll talk about the reputation. But if we talk about money and we talk about being 14 years ago, what's your thoughts on that? Can BC really have an impact on protecting for that?
I think the interesting thing about Harrods is about the facilitation of the act. It wasn't just in the darker room which nobody knew. A lot of these scandals, it's an open secret. Oh, he's like that. He has wandering hands. Don't ever put a female by themselves with that person in a room. And almost the organizations find ways of working around it and protecting their staff rather than saying, no, that's the boss, and it doesn't matter whether you're the boss, that's unacceptable behavior, and we can't do it. I think the interesting thing is about the Harrods is about the facilitation of it. And I saw them pursuing a doctor down the road to say, look, you were the person involved in some of the kind of really quite nasty, practices, HRE doctor type practices, which you had to have to join the company and examinations and stuff like that. And I think, you do have to hold those other staff and say, did you facilitate this? And I think if you do pursue the other staff, maybe like the post office as well, it does kind of send a message to you that if you facilitate this, if you're complicit in it, you may have not done anything personally yourself, but if you facilitate somebody, a powerful person, to do this, you are guilty as well. You're guilty in that act. And I think the more the prosecution people for that is, the better to me.
Yeah, no, a really good point. And that obviously the head of security is getting nailed at the moment for quashing anybody who ever said anything against the leader at the time, and then facilitating large-scale payoffs and non-disclosure agreements and everything else. The doctor, also the PAs, about almost like going and selecting the most vulnerable people to sort of send to his apartment. It is unthinkable. And I'll tell you what, if you made a film out of this, people probably wouldn't go, they'd probably go, no, that would never happen. But my goodness, it did.
The Harvey Weinstein stuff, that was exactly the same thing. Powerful, usually men, taking advantage of their power and position, and people, especially the Harrods, people wanted to work for Harrods because it was the premium brand. You want to work at international brand. It's the top shop in the UK. So, great on the CV, great place to work here.
Yeah.
So they thought.
Oh, well, yeah. Everybody thought that's the thing. You see, you look and you think sort of British colonial shop that I know is no longer British. But every time if I'm in London, I would call into Harrods and Liberties. I like going in the big shops. I never spend anything in there because I don't earn that much, but I like to go in and look round, and they're just amazing. And as you say, I mean, to imagine what's going on behind closed doors is pretty scary. Now, next question then. We talk about, what role does BC play in recovery, reputation management, business activities, workarounds when you're impacted by this kind of thing? But I, over the last 4 years, have at strategic management level run a number of these type of exercises with strategic teams. Now, you might go, oh my goodness, what companies are you working with? Because really, you would only run an exercise based on something that had been pre-identified as a major or significant risk. Now, the reason why I run these is you can't possibly have a plan. If you have a plan for sexual misconduct of the chief exec, for example, you're admitting that there's a cultural problem and the chief exec does this. So you're never going to have a plan. The beauty of running this type of exercise, though, that I have found is it's the ultimate crisis for an organization. You can't have a plan, so you've got to rely on your methodology. So you've got to apply your crisis management principles and methodology because you can't whip out a plan to give you much direction. So do we as business continuity people, because if I'm doing it, I'm sure other people do it. Do you think it's because I'm sort of, when I suggest this to companies, and I've run 3 or 4 of these, when I first suggest it for the company, they're heading for the door. And then when I talk about my aim and my roles and responsibilities within it and the objectives of the exercise, some of the more forward thinking companies embrace it and go with it. And it's not always allegation of sexual scandal. I've done corruption and I've done suppressing of ethnic minorities within the workplace as a theme as well. So what do you think? Have you ever run any of these? Would you consider running any of these? Do you think we should be running these?
I think we should be running. I think that I've always found difficulty, and this is an exercise, rather than exorcism. There's no demon. Well, probably are a few demons there. The problem a little bit about that is an exercise scenario. If they say, bad behavior by one of the exec, and it's the exec who's dealing with it, they say, well, which of you around the table want to be the person who's the bad behavior?
I never name and shame. I never use anybody.
Yeah, but you're right about that. I think you can have, I think as an exercise scenario, you can say in this specific department or this specific, maybe it's an entity or this specific location, allegations surface of inappropriate behavior, and then it can be something a bit more arm's lengthy. I think it's a good scenario. I think it's a good scenario to do because there are lots of nuances and lots of people come a real cropper with it. The CBI. I did the Formula One incident.
Well, there was, but I mean that's been quashed. The Horner allegations.
Yeah, but you see, that's interesting. Is again about allegations.
Oh, interesting.
So, because I was at Arnhem over 2 weekends ago for the 80th anniversary, and one of the guys I was speaking to said his good friend, the high flyer in the army, was in a headquarters making lots of changes, and quite a big civilian staff making lots of changes, kind of holding staff to account, really kind of shaking it up and trying to, this was an organization, we had people there for sort of 20 years and, and then he gets an allegation of bullying against him and then he's off for 18 months on, suspended. Well, they do investigations, they investigation, and in the end, they find him not guilty. But he's had 18 months sitting at home. He's a high flyer. He wants to go off and do things, and forever this is against on his name. If you Google his name, that's the first thing that comes up.
Yeah,
and it was found not guilty. We find no case proven. So some of those things are just really difficult. And I think it's more, sometimes straying into the HR area about you've got to have a really good, robust process. You've got to have an open and honest process. You've got to be seen to do justice from both sides. And you seem to got to be impartial and without any sort of hidden agendas. So I think some of that, but I think the really interesting, I don't know how I'll give you the question back again, is how do you in your exercise teach crisis managers? How do they draw a line under this? What sort of tools, techniques or methodologies you get to say, actually, how do they draw a line under this? Say, whatever we're no longer doing. Or, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's years. I mean, I was running an exercise with a financial institution where I ran. The first inject was introducing the fact that they had some interns with them over a period of time, and they were from a particular ethnic minority group that weren't normally considered the type of people who would work in this type of bank. And then sometime later, one of the interns had then done a blog about her experience within this company. And I wrote this very sort of tear-jerky blog around how this person had felt that her line manager had groomed her basically into, and there was no, he'd gone to kiss her in the end, and that was maybe as far as it had gone, but he wore her down over the time, as I did a lot of research about how grooming happens, and I put that in. Now, what I found with this company is they didn't want to go straight to strategic management team. This is a crisis. It's already out there in a blog. This is going to pick up. This is going to kill us. It's a HR issue, and we're going to deal with it within HR. So one of my early questions was, brilliant. Tell me your HR policy process for this. And the HR policy process was going to take around 9 months. And my question was, do you think you'll still be a financial institution within 9 months if you don't get a grip of this? Because it was they'd completely misunderstood the nature of what this can do to you. And I'm wondering whether a lot of organizations have still got their heads stuck in the sand going, this could never happen to us. And even if they do realize, as you said, Charlie, if you realize that you have a cultural inappropriate culture of any standard, do you think it's a quick fix? Because I reckon you've got to be looking 5, 6 years, maybe longer, with all those things you talked about that happened in the military, maybe to kill off bullying. Do you have to cut the head off the snake to cure the organization? Is the CEO ultimately responsible? Should they go? And then there is like a cleansing of the organization, because, and I, obviously being a previous police officer, some police forces have, including my own, were stuck with the title of we are institutionally racist. Now, I did 30 years in the cops, and there were pockets and individuals who I've heard being openly racist, and they were challenged even by the troops at a lower level. They were challenged. But to say an organization is institutionally racist, okay, great. How do you identify the bad apples? And then how in your orchard do you get rid of the bad apples? And how long is that going to take? And to be honest, show me the route map for that. Who's going to do that?
Yeah, I think that's really... There used to be a thing when I'm getting all nostalgic about the army today. There used to be something in Sandhurst and places where you're on a training course. Sandhurst is now a year, and they basically say, so you're on a slippery slope. You're on that slippery slope, or you've done a few things. You're now under the spotlight, and you see this typically, like Tory government. Whatever they did was wrong. whereas other governments would get away with it because they're on the spotlight for Sleaze and all the sort of bad stuff they did. They're on the spotlight, something happens again, maybe I minor, and it reinforces. It turns into a self-reinforcing circle. And it is very, very difficult to dig yourself out of that. We've seen with your former colleagues at a distance, the Met Office there. How do they ever dig themselves out of the hole? Because it's full of people who will occasionally do bad stuff. And now the press is looking for a bad policeman, and they're looking for the other bad policeman. If you look hard enough, you'll find them.
Yeah,
because that's the nature of, coming back to our earlier, nature of people. So it's how do you get off that slippery slope? And I'll just take one example here where our way of doing it, there was a little while ago, Starbucks had a couple of black guys came into in America. Black guys come into there and sat down, and the manager said, you need to buy a coffee. And they said, no, we're just waiting for my friend. We'll buy a coffee once my friend turns up. And he basically, long and short, got them to arrested and passed off to the police. They were then accused of being racist. Yeah, fine. Not fine, but you know what I mean. And then and they started a protest against Starbucks about being racist. So how did they draw a line under it? They said, right, we're going to send everybody on racial awareness training. But what they were clever enough to do, they didn't just sort of do it one place at a time on their spare day. They closed down the entire Starbucks for an afternoon. That was news, and it reinforced the point that they took this very seriously and would put up with that lack of revenue for that afternoon because they took it seriously enough. So you can, and you see that with celebrities, maybe they're sex addicts or drink or drugs addicts. What do? They go away, they get out of the headlines, they go away on some retreat to go and discover themselves. They're then discovered, funny enough, working in a women's refuge or working with refugees or something that's very worthy, and they serve out their sentence when they feel it's back to reappear. But I've done my penance, a religious bit there. I've done my penance there, and I've come back everyone loves a redemption story, and I've showed I've come back a better person. So companies can do that, but it's more difficult for companies than individuals, I think.
Yeah. I was amazed companies like Volkswagen recovered after the emissions scandal so quickly. It was as though Volkswagen 1 minute, were outed by California, and then the world got on it, and then it was proved that yes, there was this little gadget that made, when you tested your vehicle, it lowered your emissions score, and all the people at the top went, well, we didn't know that was there. I mean, come on. It's fraud. Why wasn't, the hierarchy of VW languishing in a prison somewhere? Why weren't they doing community service, sweeping the streets somewhere? It just seems to see that some organizations, maybe it's the brand or maybe it's the image, almost some companies are untarnishable. And then there's the others that even maybe minor things can polish them off with reputational damage. It's just really interesting to see. Apple's had a lot of things thrown at it. Tesla's had a lot of things thrown at it, but they just bounce back.
I think it does help if you have a strong brand. I think if you do have a strong brand, that's a start of one. And people are fickle. People always go buy Ryanair. They're still doing it with us and all the stories about Ryanair, but they're cheap and they get to the places you want to go and they're cheap. And also, again, they're cheap. So, we go Ryanair, then we don't, if we want to go British Airways and go more expensive. You have a choice. Yeah. And I think, some of these brands like Volkswagen, we like Volkswagen's cars, they're good cars, We knew that we're cheating on the emissions, but we know that it said 25 miles per gallon, that you never get 25 miles per gallon. You always got 17. So everyone, it was kind of almost like an open secret of that, where they were cheating on that, or you had to do it, at midnight with a full moon, with no wind and downhill, with a 5-stone driver kind of thing. But everyone knew there was a cheat on that, It wasn't.
I mean, there wasn't just
Well, I think
VW.
Volkswagen's a
Just
good
in case
point.
everybody, of VW lovers out there, there was a number of organisations who were all in there fiddling, but VW were
Yeah,
probably one of the largest.
yeah,
Right, Charlie. I mean, my goodness, we could talk all day about the
yeah.
fascinating subject of crisis communications and how you deal with these types of things. But unfortunately, we've come to the end of another episode. So, finally, thank you very much for the people who are listening. Remember, if this is the first time you found our podcast, we've done 4 before. Please dip in and have a look at those. They're all available across different media channels. YouTube is probably one of the biggest ones where we are prominent at the moment. If you like them, please subscribe, comment, tell all your friends, share them, and also rate us. But if you don't like them, tell us. Get into some debate. We're always, we stick our chins out so you can throw tomatoes at us. So if you don't like what you hear, throw some tomatoes. We've got very broad shoulders, and we will respond. So once again, everybody who listened, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.